He was admired by thousands, a holy man with power and grace, but behind the pulpit, he carried a dark secret. When his only son revealed the truth about who he loved, that respectable bishop pulled the trigger. This is the chilling story of Bishop Leonard Harrow and the son he could not accept. We live in a world where appearances deceive. The men we trust most, the figures we look up to for guidance, can sometimes be the very ones harboring demons they cannot control. This story is not just about religion, love, or family, it's about the devastating power of shame, pride, and the refusal to accept truth. Bishop Leonard Harrow stood on the altar every Sunday, preaching forgiveness, mercy, and love. Yet, when faced with his own son's truth, he abandoned everything he claimed to stand for. This story forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality: how far will someone go to protect their reputation, even at the cost of their own blood? Before we dive deep into this 2-hour journey of betrayal, secrets, and tragedy, I want you to pause for a moment. If you enjoy stories that peel back the curtain on the darkest parts of human behavior, make sure you subscribe to this channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more powerful stories like this one. Now, let's step into the world of Bishop Leonard Harrow. The cathedral bells rang out across the city every Sunday morning, their deep tones echoing through narrow streets and wide avenues. Families in polished shoes and pressed clothes streamed toward Grace of Redemption Cathedral, a towering building of stone and stained glass that had become the heart of the community. At the center of it all was one man, Bishop Leonard Harrow. To the world, Bishop Leonard was the embodiment of holiness. At 58 years old, his presence was commanding yet graceful. Standing at 6 feet tall with broad shoulders, his every step seemed deliberate, every gesture calculated. His hair, once a deep black, now carried streaks of silver that only seemed to add to his dignity. His dark robes draped elegantly as he walked down the marble aisle, his Bible pressed firmly to his chest, his expression solemn but gentle. When he spoke, his voice filled every corner of the cathedral. It was deep, resonant, carrying both authority and warmth. He preached of forgiveness, family values, and the importance of keeping one's home in order. People listened, hanging on to his every word. Mothers nudged their children to pay attention. Fathers whispered to their sons, "Be like him one day." The bishop was more than a man, he was a symbol. He baptized babies, blessed marriages, counseled the grieving, and prayed over the sick. Politicians sought his approval, wealthy business owners courted his friendship, and everyday worshippers considered themselves lucky just to shake his hand. In the eyes of the community, Leonard Harrow was untouchable, a man who walked with God. But appearances, as they often are, were deceiving. Behind the grandeur of the pulpit and the admiration of thousands, Bishop Leonard carried a secret, a darkness he fought desperately to keep hidden. He wasn't just preaching to his flock, he was performing. Every sermon was carefully crafted to maintain his reputation. Every public appearance was another stitch in the fabric of an image he refused to let unravel. At home, the bishop was not the same man his congregation adored. His wife, Patricia Harrow, knew this truth all too well. Patricia was 52, soft-spoken, and dignified, always dressed modestly in elegant dresses that complemented her quiet beauty. She played the role of the supportive bishop's wife with grace, smiling at church functions, shaking hands, and thanking parishioners for their kind words. But once the doors closed at home, her smile often faded. Leonard demanded perfection, not just from himself, but from his family. He was strict, controlling, and quick to correct any behavior he felt might bring shame upon his household. Patricia learned long ago not to argue with him in public and not to question his authority at home. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple. But inside their large, carefully decorated home, Patricia often felt more like a shadow than a partner. And then there was Ethan Harrow, their only son. Ethan was the light in Patricia's eyes, but a constant source of disappointment to his father. At 24, Ethan was handsome in a softer way, with a kind face, dark expressive eyes, and a smile that carried warmth. Unlike his father, Ethan was not built for power or control. He was sensitive, artistic, and had inherited Patricia's gentleness rather than Leonard's commanding nature. From a young age, Ethan struggled to fit into the mold Leonard had created for him. The bishop wanted his son to be strong, disciplined, and ready to inherit not just his faith but also his reputation. He imagined Ethan standing at the pulpit one day, continuing the Harrow legacy. But Ethan had other dreams. He loved books, art, and design. He loved conversation, creativity, and compassion. Leonard saw these qualities as weaknesses. At the dinner table, he would glare when Ethan spoke too softly or laughed too freely. "A man must be firm," he would scold. "You're not a child anymore. Speak with authority." Patricia often tried to defend her son. "He's just different, Leonard. There's nothing wrong with that." But Leonard would wave her off. "He's my son. He'll learn." Ethan grew up under that heavy shadow, torn between wanting his father's approval and knowing he could never truly earn it, not by being who he was. Still, to the outside world, the Harrows looked perfect. On Sundays, Patricia sat in the front pew with Ethan beside her, smiling up at Leonard as he preached. Parishioners admired the sight, a strong bishop, his loyal wife, and his obedient son. They never saw the tension simmering underneath, the harsh words exchanged behind closed doors, or the silent tears Patricia shed when no one was watching. The bishop's obsession with image was unrelenting. He reminded his family constantly that their actions reflected on him. "We are Harrows," he would say. "People look up to us. We cannot afford mistakes." But deep down, Leonard feared something he could not control. He sensed it in Ethan, the difference, the softness, the unspoken truth that lingered between them. Though Ethan never said it out loud, Leonard suspected. And suspicion festered in him like poison. He prayed about it at night, pacing his study, clutching his Bible. But his prayers were not for understanding or compassion. They were prayers of fear, begging God to fix what he saw as a flaw in his son. To Leonard, the idea of having a son who didn't fit the image he demanded wasn't just unacceptable, it was unbearable. And so, Leonard doubled down. He preached harder. He controlled more strictly. He demanded obedience, not realizing that the tighter he clenched his fists, the more his son slipped away. In the cathedral, the bishop shone like gold. At home, cracks were forming in the foundation of his family. And soon, those cracks would split wide open. The Harrow home was a striking, two-story brick house on the edge of the city. From the outside, it was elegant and dignified, manicured hedges, polished windows, a white front door with golden handles. To neighbors, it looked like the residence of a family blessed by God himself. But inside, the walls carried a different story. In the study, Bishop Leonard kept shelves stacked with theology books, commentaries, and framed certificates of honor from community leaders. It was a shrine not to God, but to his reputation. Every evening, he would sit in the high-back leather chair, polishing sermons that reinforced his authority. Meanwhile, in the upstairs bedroom, Ethan Harrow sat at his desk, sketching designs and scribbling poetry into notebooks. His room was his sanctuary, filled with books, art supplies, and photographs. Unlike the rigid order of his father's study, Ethan's space was alive with color and creativity. Ethan was 24, with a gentle presence that people were drawn to. He had dark, expressive eyes that revealed more emotion than he often spoke, and his laughter carried a softness that contrasted with the stern atmosphere of the Harrow home. To his mother, Patricia, he was a blessing, her comfort and pride. To his father, Leonard, he was a problem waiting to be fixed. From the earliest days, Leonard had tried to mold Ethan into a reflection of himself. He enrolled him in private Christian schools, signed him up for debate clubs, and insisted he attend every church function. "You are my son," Leonard would say. "One day, you'll stand where I stand. You'll preach the word." But Ethan resisted, not out of rebellion, but out of truth. He didn't see himself on the pulpit. He didn't feel the fire to preach. His passions were elsewhere, in writing, in art, and in quiet conversations where he could connect with people on a personal level. There was something else, too. Something deeper. Ethan knew from a young age that he was different. While other boys in church talked about girls they liked, Ethan found his heart pulling in another direction. He didn't have the words for it at first. He only knew that his eyes lingered on the smiles of boys longer than they did on girls, that his heart raced differently when he was around them. By the time he reached adulthood, the truth was undeniable: Ethan was gay. It was not something he chose. It was not something he could pray away. It was simply who he was. But in the Harrow household, this truth was dangerous. Leonard preached fiery sermons condemning what he called the sin of perversion. His words cut deep into Ethan, like knives to the soul. Each time his father thundered against homosexuality from the pulpit, Ethan felt smaller, crushed under the weight of shame. At home, Leonard's suspicions grew. He noticed Ethan's lack of interest in women, his friendships that seemed too close, his refusal to talk about dating. Though Ethan never confessed, Leonard's eyes narrowed each time he studied his son. Patricia, on the other hand, sensed Ethan's secret in her mother's heart. She noticed the way he lit up when certain friends came around, the way he avoided conversations about marriage, the way he seemed burdened by something unsaid. She didn't press him, she loved him as he was, but she also feared what would happen when Leonard finally discovered the truth. It was Julian who gave Ethan courage. Julian Reyes was 26, a nurse at the local hospital. He had met Ethan through mutual friends, and their connection was instant. Julian had warm brown eyes, an easy smile, and a steady calmness that balanced Ethan's anxieties. While Leonard carried himself like a general, Julian carried himself like a healer. He listened. He cared. He loved without judgment. Their relationship grew in secret. Late-night walks, quiet dinners, shared laughter in Ethan's apartment, moments that felt like freedom. For 3 years, Julian had been Ethan's anchor, teaching him that love didn't have to be hidden, that it didn't have to be shameful. Still, Ethan was afraid. His father's shadow loomed large, and the thought of confessing the truth terrified him. But love has a way of pushing fear aside. After 3 years with Julian, Ethan knew he couldn't hide anymore. He wanted to live openly. He wanted to marry the man he loved. It was Julian who asked the question one autumn evening. They were walking through the park, the golden leaves crunching under their feet. Ethan's hands were buried in his pockets, Julian's arm brushing against his. Julian stopped and turned to him. "Ethan," he said softly, "we've been hiding for so long. Don't you want more than this?" Ethan looked at him, his heart pounding. "Of course I do." Julian pulled a small box from his jacket pocket. Inside, a simple silver band gleamed. "Then let's stop hiding. Marry me." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. He nodded, unable to speak, and pulled Julian into an embrace. "Yes," he whispered. 1,000 times yes. The decision was made. Ethan would tell his family. He would tell his father. For the first time in his life, he felt ready to stand firm, even if it meant facing rejection. He invited his parents to dinner the following week. He cooked a meal with care, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and Patricia's favorite lemon tart for dessert. He lit candles and played soft music, determined to create an atmosphere of peace. Julian would join them, not as a hidden boyfriend, but as Ethan's fiancé. As he set the table, his hands trembled. He knew the storm that was coming. But he also knew one thing, he was done hiding. The table was set with meticulous care. Ethan wanted everything to be perfect. The candles flickered softly, their light reflecting off the polished silverware. A vase of fresh lilies sat in the center, filling the air with a delicate fragrance. The roasted chicken rested on a serving tray, golden and glistening, while bowls of buttery mashed potatoes, green beans, and warm rolls steamed invitingly. The lemon tart chilled in the fridge, waiting to be unveiled as the sweet ending to what Ethan hoped would be a new beginning. This wasn't just dinner. This was the moment he had dreaded and prayed for. The moment he would finally tell his parents the truth, not just about who he was, but who he loved, and the life he planned to build. As he adjusted the napkins one last time, Julian walked into the dining room, straightening his shirt nervously. "You've outdone yourself," Julian said softly, his warm brown eyes scanning the table. Ethan smiled faintly, though his hands trembled as he fixed the placement of the wine glasses. "I want it to feel normal. Like any other family dinner." Julian placed a hand on his shoulder. "Whatever happens tonight, remember this, we're in this together. You don't have to carry this alone." Ethan leaned into Julian's touch for a brief moment, grounding himself in that comfort. Then the sound of a car pulling into the driveway sent his heart racing. "They're here," Ethan whispered. Patricia entered first, elegant as always, wearing a soft blue dress that complemented her calm presence. She carried a small smile, her eyes lighting up when she saw her son. "Oh, Ethan, this looks lovely," she said, kissing his cheek. She handed him a bottle of wine. "I thought this might go well with dinner." Ethan hugged her tightly, grateful for her warmth. Then Leonard walked in. Bishop Harrow, as the congregation knew him, didn't bother with casual attire, not even for family dinners. He wore a crisp dark suit, his tie perfectly knotted, his hair neatly combed. His presence was commanding, almost suffocating, as though he carried the entire weight of the cathedral with him into his son's modest apartment. He scanned the room, his eyes catching sight of Julian. His brow furrowed slightly. "And who is this?" Julian extended a hand, steady and polite. "Julian Reyes. I'm a friend of Ethan's." "It's good to meet you, sir." Leonard shook his hand firmly, his grip like iron. "Friend," he repeated, his tone flat. Then he turned back to Ethan. "Let's eat." Dinner began in a tense silence. Patricia tried to break it with light conversation, asking about Ethan's work, complimenting the food, but Leonard's mood hung heavy over the table. He ate mechanically, his sharp eyes occasionally flicking toward Julian, as though measuring him, calculating something unspoken. Ethan pushed food around his plate, his appetite lost to nerves. Julian reached under the table, giving his hand a gentle squeeze. The simple gesture gave him the strength to clear his throat and speak. "Mom, Dad," Ethan began, his voice shaking slightly. "There's something important I need to tell you." Leonard's fork clinked against his plate as he set it down, folding his hands in front of him. "Go on." Ethan's heart pounded so loudly he wondered if they could hear it. He glanced at Julian, who nodded, then turned back to his parents. "This isn't easy for me. I've kept it from you for a long time, because I was afraid. But I can't live in hiding anymore." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I'm gay." Patricia froze, her fork slipping from her hand. Her eyes darted from Ethan to Leonard, fear written across her face. Leonard's expression hardened, his jaw tightening. The room seemed to shrink, the air thick with tension. But Ethan wasn't finished. He reached for Julian's hand on the table and held it openly. "And this is Julian. He's not just my partner. He's the man I love. We've been together for 3 years, and we're engaged." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Julian sat tall, his hand firm in Ethan's, refusing to shrink under Leonard's gaze. Patricia's eyes brimmed with tears, her lips parted but no words coming. "And Leonard?" Leonard's face was a storm. "Engaged," he repeated, his voice low, dangerous. "To a man?" "Yes," Ethan said, his voice trembling but resolute. "To Julian. I love him, Dad. And I want to marry him." The silence shattered like glass under a hammer. Leonard slammed his fist on the table, sending plates rattling and glasses toppling. His booming voice filled the room. "You shame me. You shame this family. You shame God himself." Ethan stood, his body trembling but his voice steady. "I'm not ashamed, Dad. I've spent my whole life trying to be what you wanted, and I can't do it anymore. This is who I am. And I won't apologize for it." Patricia covered her mouth, sobbing quietly. "Please, Leonard, calm down." But Leonard was beyond calming. He pointed a shaking finger at Julian. You did this. You corrupted him. You turned my son into this." Julian met his fury with quiet dignity. "With respect, Bishop, I didn't corrupt him. I love him. That's all." The words seemed to ignite Leonard further. He rose from his seat, towering over the table, his chest heaving with rage. His eyes burned into Julian, then turned back to Ethan with a mixture of fury and disgust. Ethan's heart raced, but he refused to back down. "I'm not asking for your permission. I'm telling you the truth. You can either accept me as I am, or you can lose me forever. But I will not deny who I am to make you comfortable." The room vibrated with the weight of those words. Patricia sobbed openly, torn between her husband's fury and her son's plea for acceptance. Leonard stood in silence for a long moment, his breath heavy, his fists clenched. Then, without a word, he turned and stormed out of the apartment, the door slamming so hard behind him that the walls shook. Ethan collapsed into his chair, tears streaming down his face. Julian pulled him close, whispering, "You did it. You told them. You stood your ground." But Ethan's heart was heavy. He knew this wasn't over. His father's silence was not surrender, it was the calm before a storm. And deep down, he feared that storm would be unlike anything he had ever faced before. Days turned into weeks, and the Harrow household became a battlefield of silence. Leonard refused to acknowledge Ethan, and Patricia tried desperately to keep peace. But Leonard's anger only grew. To him, this wasn't just about his son's choices, it was about his reputation. If word spread that the bishop's son was gay, it would tarnish everything he had built. Behind closed doors, Leonard prayed violently, begging God to deliver his son from what he saw as sin. But those prayers weren't about love, they were about control. Ethan, meanwhile, found comfort in Julian. They planned their wedding quietly, choosing love over fear. But Leonard discovered the wedding invitation hidden in Patricia's purse. And that discovery would push him over the edge. It was a cold November night when Leonard drove to Ethan's apartment. He carried with him not just anger, but a handgun he kept in his study drawer, for protection. He arrived unannounced, finding Ethan and Julian together, finalizing plans. "Dad?" Ethan asked, shocked to see him. Leonard's voice was eerily calm. "I came to talk." But the talk turned quickly into an argument. Words were exchanged, voices raised. Ethan refused to back down, standing firm beside Julian. "I love him, Dad. And I'm marrying him. Whether you like it or not." Something in Leonard snapped. His hand went to the gun. Patricia, who had followed Leonard out of worry, arrived just in time to see the unthinkable. "Leonard, no," she screamed. But it was too late. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the apartment. Ethan collapsed to the floor, his blood staining the carpet. Julian screamed in horror, rushing to hold Ethan's lifeless body. Patricia fell to her knees, wailing. And Leonard? Leonard stood frozen, the gun still trembling in his hand, realizing the irreversible crime he had just committed. The Harrow family's world shattered. Leonard was arrested that night, his name plastered in whispers across the town he once ruled. Patricia, broken and devastated, stood in court, torn between the man she married and the son she lost. Julian testified with tears streaming down his face, describing the love he and Ethan shared, and the moment it was destroyed. Leonard tried to defend himself, claiming it was the heat of the moment, and that he only wanted to stop Ethan from ruining his life. But the jury saw through his excuses. The once respected bishop was sentenced, stripped of his titles, and left to rot in prison, a fallen man who chose pride over love. Though Ethan's life was cut short, his story did not die with him. Julian, determined to honor his love, started a foundation in Ethan's name, supporting young LGBTQ individuals rejected by their families. Patricia became a quiet supporter, distancing herself from Leonard and finding solace in helping others. The church that once worshipped Bishop Leonard now stood as a cautionary tale. Congregants whispered about the man who preached love but could not practice it in his own home. And Ethan's memory lived on, not as a victim of shame, but as a symbol of truth, courage, and love. This story is not just about one man's crime. It's about the devastating consequences of hate, pride, and the refusal to accept those we claim to love. Bishop Leonard Harrow destroyed his own son because he valued reputation more than humanity. And in doing so, he lost everything, his family, his freedom, and his legacy. Ethan's life, though short, left behind a message stronger than any sermon his father ever preached: love is love, and no one has the right to kill it. What do you think led Bishop Leonard to pull the trigger? Was it pure hatred, fear of reputation, or something darker within him? If you were moved by this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another deep, powerful crime story like this one. And remember, behind every headline, behind every crime, there's a story that needs to be told.